early, but I just want to test my microphone, make sure you guys can hear me okay. All good? No? Yes? Okay, good. I got nervous there. Sometimes Windows screws up my audio, and then all of a sudden my microphone stops working, and other things stop working. Okay, cool. So today's lesson is going to be a little shorter than usual. The biggest reason being is last semester I taught style components as well as React Bootstrap, which kind of inflated the lessons a little bit. This semester I took them out because they just proved to be really super confusing. React's already confusing enough without getting into extra modules that aren't a part of the vanilla application. So instead, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to learn about data and APIs and how to work with data, like flat file data that's on our system, as well as connecting to APIs and consuming that data. And then once we're done that, which should be done probably within the first, I want to say an hour and 20 minutes maybe, not even, then I'm going to introduce the project that I'm going to issue, and then we will build the starter file for the project together, just so you guys have a full understanding of how that's done. And then you guys can just go ahead and work on your project or ask me any questions that you may have about anything else. I did mark all the labs that I had submitted. I appreciate the mass number of you that deployed to Netlify. That's a huge help on me because it means that I don't really have to dig into code, which is great. That's always a plus. Those of you that didn't submit it by Git, that's also fine. However, those of you who did Netlify, you'll notice that you got a bonus for deploying to Netlify because it wasn't required. I did give one bonus to somebody who just gave me a Git link, but that's because they went outside the box a little bit and also implemented material theme, which I thought was kind of, taking a risk. So I appreciated that, so they also got a bonus as well. I did reach out to a few of you and gave you a note, so if for some reason you didn't get a good grade, you are welcome to resubmit, because I believe in both cases that happened, it was due to one, the Git repo not having the updated content on it, and the second one was something to do, I think it was also a Git issue actually. I think both of them were Git issues. So just make sure you've looked at those comments. Please let me know if you didn't get the grade and it's not on not Blackboard, but in D2L, because I'm brand new to DTL. And I'll say this, I hated Blackboard from Georgian because that's what they use. Like, absolutely despise Blackboard, but D2L is so convoluted for no reason that I would argue that it's almost worse. It's almost worse. Not quite. Blackboard still definitely takes the cake for being the worst course lesson shell system out there, for sure. Alright, cool. So let's, we're going to start off with the same lesson we did last week, right? So just your lesson 4 live, just open it up because we're just going to add to this because it already has the foundations of everything we need anyways. Not going to, build a whole brand new lesson for no reason. So if you want to go ahead and open that up, that would be great. While you're doing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about last week and what we covered. Let me just get into this. Sorry, I'm a little discombobulated tonight because we have a big addition being built onto our house, 30 by 30 feet extra onto the home. And just there's some hiccups due to COVID, and there's some hiccups due to, mostly I would say just COVID. Yeah. So we're running out of materials and stuff like that. So we're just dealing with that literally 3 minutes before I came online. So, So I'm just finding myself here. All right, yeah, cool. So we dealt with React Router. So React Router, very cool tool to use. You don't necessarily need to use React Router. There's a lot of people who don't use React Router and instead build their own kind of hide-show systems. But at the end of the day, React Router is a perfect solution. It's recommended by React themselves. It's built by React themselves. So it's definitely worth your time to look into and definitely to use. I know at LMG, where I work, we use it. When I worked at Intent, we used it. I teach it as well, and countless other code bases I've seen use it. So it's definitely worthwhile to know what it is and how it works. Now, you guys did a little bit of routing in your MVC class. We're not going to build our own router, but we're definitely going to take a look at using routers inside the node side, which will start in 3 weeks, which will be super cool because it'll give you more of an in-depth view on how routers actually work and function, which hopefully will open your mind more to how MVC works in general. But yeah, routing is crucial. It's absolutely crucial to software design, so it's definitely something to be aware of. We took a look at fundamental React hooks. So those are the basic hooks, like just need a recap from my own brain here. Effect, state, those ones, reference, right? Those are all fundamental hooks. State, super important because the browser is stateless and our React application is technically stateless as well. So when we switch components, an update will be triggered every time we switch components or content inside a component changes. It will force an update, which means any variables that we have defined get reinitialized and reestablished. So you lose those values. Well, that's where state comes in, because state allows us to be able to maintain value when we need it. Use effect is used for, basically it's a trigger for when the DOM loads. So once our component has mounted and it's visible to the end user, we can tap into that component and actually trigger, different DOM effects that we want to do, or API calls, or whatever it is we need to do at that particular point, and have access to the actual DOM API. So use effect is super important. I did have one student that didn't use effect or use state or props for that matter. They rolled some super vanilla JavaScript, which was fine to a point, but I did make a note that I don't want you to use vanilla JavaScript. There's limitations to vanilla JavaScript when you're working with the React application. A lot of it has to do with when you think things are loading and also what state values you have. The problem with the particular strategy that they used is, in the future, if you tried to access the value that they were changing, it would actually disappear on the next component update. So it was a bit of an issue in that scenario. So you definitely want to get familiar with using state and using effect and using props. So you're going to use those three things all the time. The other ones are not quite as common, like use reference is not quite as common, but it is a crucial thing to understand, as use reference can definitely give you access easily to DOM elements on your page that you have defined with React. It makes it a little simpler to access those elements without having to litter your whole thing with like IDs everywhere, right? Because you don't want to have to do that. What else? Memo. Memo is super handy, especially when you're dealing with large calculations. You use memo in order to store that information, so that way the React component doesn't have to re-render that particular value or recalculate that value. It just maintains, it's almost like state, it kind of remembers that the value of that particular function or long-running calculation that you did. So use memo is definitely handy and crucial. And the last one we talked about was use provider. Now, we will have a test next week, just in case you didn't realize. Week 6 is our midterm. So next week it will be open book. It's kind of an interesting concept. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit, but it's open book, it's open internet, it's even open Slack and Discord. Like, you can talk amongst each other. The idea is that you work on it and submit it, but you can't really cheat, because each person will kind of have their own React version and your own bugs and stuff to fix. But we'll talk more about that in a bit. But yeah, so anyways, the user provider, like the whole idea of context provider, will not be on there. So I like to introduce people to it so that they are aware of it existing. There are other solutions like Redux, but using vanilla React wherever you can will improve performance, obviously. So be aware of it. It is something that we will touch more in the Node part of our course, because we'll get more into it with Node, especially when we start trying to authenticate requests from the front to the back, which I think is in week 12 or 11. I think it's week 11, so it'll be a little bit in the future. But yeah, so those were the basic hooks that we talked about, plus the advanced hooks. Did anybody have any questions about hooks? You all kind of seemed to catch it pretty good in the lab. Like, it seemed to be fairly straightforward for you. No? All right. Cool. So, hopefully you have this open now. We're going to add into it today, and obviously there's things we need to add first. So we're going to tap into our navigation, add some navigation to some components that we're going to create. We're going to create 2 data components tonight. One to demonstrate how to work with data that is locally stored on our inside our repository, right, inside our application. And then another one we're going to take a look at working with remote data from an API. We're going to use an API that already exists. It's just like I call it a dummy API because it doesn't actually have data in it that's relevant to anybody. It's not secure data or anything, but it's a way to be able to test your application. So that's good. Sorry, the midterm is after what, study week? Good question. I don't think so, because I think next week isn't study week, is it? Is next week study week? Hold on. I always lose important dates. Lakehead, important dates. If that's the case, then yes, it will be the week following. Why don't they have a calendar? Like just a normal calendar. Payment deadlines, late payments, scholarships, exam timetables, study breaks. Study breaks, that's what I want. We're in winter study break. February 15th, so yeah, that is next week. Okie doke. Okay, cool. So the midterm. Oh yeah, plus next week is Family Day anyways, so it's irrelevant either way. Yeah, so we're pushed to the following week for our midterm, so we'll do that. Incidentally, I'm not sure if you guys know this as well, but the final exam is scheduled. Like they schedule it and then they provide me with the time for the final exam and then I pass that or they send it to you or something works that way. This is the first university course I taught, so I'm not entirely sure how that particular part works. I know when I was in university, it was a pain in the butt. Like I had an exam at 10 o'clock at night one time and I had to drive to Oshawa for it, which was, and I'm in Aurelia, so it was kind of annoying to have to drive to Oshawa to go take an exam at 10 o'clock at night. But hopefully we don't wind up with anything like that. No super late night exams. Yeah, okay, so next week, no, don't worry, don't panic, ignore everything I've said. It will be the following week, will be the midterm, and it'll be open book. And I'll release, usually I release like a practice thing so that you can kind of practice with it. That being said though, even though it's open book, open internet, and open Discord, Slack, whatever, everybody's like, cool, that's easy enough, I don't need to study. I'm going to warn you right now, you do. Like, you definitely do. I've had more students fail that. Even though it seems like it would be simpler, it's not. Because there's just so much stuff to do, and you only have 3 hours to do it in. And it doesn't take much to wind up down a rabbit hole, so to speak, and get kind of stuck and lose a ton of time, right? So make sure you study so you know exactly where you're looking. Like, ideally, the exams should be able to be completed within 45 minutes. That's usually the way I make them. I usually do them so that I can complete them in 30 minutes, and if I can complete it in 30 minutes, I expect you guys to be able to do it within an hour, right? But if you can't do it within the hour, you have 3 full hours to do it. But still, study. Don't screw yourself over. Make sure you study. All right, cool. We'll talk more about the test after this stuff. We'll do this. We'll do the test discussion, then we'll do the project, and then we'll call it a night. Alright, cool. So the first thing we're going to need to do, because right now our system currently is a bit, it's missing things. Let's first, sorry, still trying to grab my bearings here. Let's open the thing up. I'll go to my live lessons here. Let's open it up in Git Bash or in your PowerShell or terminal or whatever you're using. We'll do that first. And then I'm going to actually dock it down here. And I'm going to take this one and dock it up there. There we go. Which one's the right one here? This one's the right one. Cool. And then I'm going to just, like, everything's already installed. It should still already be installed for you. So I'm just going to type in yarn start and let it boot up. I also need my lesson plan. Totally forgot about that. Incidentally, there won't be any assignments. Well, I guess the project is technically an assignment, but the project won't be due for almost 4 weeks. So, not a big deal. Please do yourself a favor, and when it is reading week, take that time and actually just relax. Try to relax as much as possible. I know that's difficult because I'm not sure if you guys still have gen eds that you're completing. I know gen eds can be some of the most time-consuming things that you get, but hopefully your teachers have been fairly good and you guys have reading week available to yourselves. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some new menu items. Right now we have our 5 kind of hook menu items. We're going to add 2 more, but we'll do it one at... No, do you want to do them both at the same time? No, we'll do one at a time. I mean, why not? So let's go to shared and let's open up our navigation.jsx. And I'll zoom in so that you can see. I'm going to come right to the bottom here where we have our last nav item, which is just the context item. And I'm going to come underneath there and we're going to add a new li, class name equals nav item. You can also just copy the one above. I mean, that's probably the easier way to do that. And I'm going to add a link with a capital L, not a lowercase l. Case does matter. And it has a class name of navlink. And you'll remember that we don't use hrefs with the link module from React Router DOM. Instead, we use the to attribute. And the to attribute basically works the same as href. We just give it a path. And I think my path is called data local. I don't like to veer too much for my lessons because then you guys can look at the lessons and you're not kind of trying to figure out where things are located. I'm pretty sure it's called data local. Or it's called local data. See? Pay attention. Local data. Local dash data, actually. Oops. Hitting wrong cursor keys here. And then we can close that and just add in the local data label. And the wonderful thing is when you hit save, it pops up a new little menu item up there for us, which is kind of nice. Of course, if you click it, it doesn't actually load anything because it's not currently connected to any of our actual components. We actually don't have a component for it quite yet. So to remedy that, I'm going to create a component. I'll just copy this li for you just in case you're waiting for it. I'm going to add under components, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it data. And then within that folder itself, I'm going to create a new component and call it local data.jsx. And that's obviously going to open up a new JSX component for us. And we're just going to stub out a component, right? And you guys, hopefully by this point, totally remember how to stub out a component. So I'm just going to type in import React from React. I'm going to give it a name. And obviously, I'll just name it after my file. I'm going to create an arrow function for it. And for now, I'll just return null, because we have to return something. Whoops. And then I'll just export this as my default module. Nice and simple. By this point, hopefully you're creating React components in your sleep. I mean, it's a terrible way to sleep. But so this is our component. Now, right now, our navigation still doesn't work, right? It doesn't automatically point to the component. We need to load the component into our React router in order to point at it. Slap coding sound effects. Sounds efficient? Yeah. Sleep coding? Yeah. I figured out what you meant. Slap coding sounds like something completely different. But yeah, sleep coding sounds better. All right, we're going to open up router.jsx. Hopefully I'm not going too fast and you guys are still catching up here. Like, do you need me to slow down a little bit? I think I need to drink less coffee through the day. I've been up since 5 a.m. working in code all day long, trying to code out an image consumer, it's called, which is used for taking assets and encoding them into other web formats and then putting them into S3 on Amazon, which is about as boring as it sounds. But yeah, so I drank lots of coffee to keep myself awake through it. All right, so we've got local data. Now I'm going to go into my router.jsx, which is under the shared folder. If you ever get lost and you have no idea where I am, just look at the breadcrumbs or just reach out and say, hey, what file is this? Where is it located? And I will help you. So the first thing we need to do is import that component. So we're going to import local data from ... Why is it not coming up in the list? Oh, it did come up in the list. I didn't even notice it. Data, local data. Boom. That's imported. That's imported. It's not domestic, it's imported. Let's go ahead and add that as a new route as well. So we will create a route with a capital R, exact path, and this needs to match the same path that this link is currently pointing to, which is /local data. So /local-data. And then we give it the component we want to render, and that component is called local data. And it's a self-closing route. Enter button stopped working for a second. While you're typing that out, I'm going to talk a little bit about self-describing data. Now, out of curiosity, do you guys already know what self-describing data is? Have you worked with JSON and XML before? Have any of you worked with JSON or XML? Yes? Cool. Did you do it in school or did you just do it on your own? Both? Okay, that's cool. Awesome. So self-describing data, right? That's exactly what those things are called. Self-describing data is usually non-platform specific, right? So every programming language out there that I've ever interacted with, and that includes super strict languages like C++, has some way to work with JSON or XML data, right? Some way, some library. Usually it's native too. Like usually it's vanilla to the library, to the coding language. So self-describing data isn't limited to JSON and XML. There are other types of self-describing data that are out there, though those two are the most common, especially when we start working with API. Databases also provide access to self-describing data in a form of records or collections. So you can kind of think of a database schema as being also a form of self-describing data. The dynamic web relies on these crucial data structures in order to provide a scalable solution to web applications. And what that basically means is that the web works more, not even the web, just applications in general work better when they work as almost microservices, which is essentially a service that does one fundamental thing. So for example, at LMG, we have these things called article stacks. And each stack is a brand, right? And it contains a bunch of different components. And the components that it has is a front-end website for general people who are consuming the web, just a public-facing website. An administrative website that allows editors and blog writers and stuff like that to be able to add content. And then that connects to something called a REST system. And the way it connects to the REST system is through self-describing data. It uses JSON in order to communicate to the REST system. The administrative side creates a packet or a request that contains that JSON notation, and then it sends it off to the REST side. The REST takes that JSON and then does whatever it's going to do with it in order to process it. The reason why that's super important to understand is because even though our admin side is built in React and Pug and Node and JavaScript, and yes, our REST side is built in JavaScript as well, it's built in Node, that isn't 100% necessary at all. You could actually build a whole REST side, or whole REST application in PHP. Say that's your favorite language to work in. But you've got people working for you that are primarily JavaScript programmers and want to work in JavaScript on their front end. That's fine. They can go code in React all day long. You can build your back-end REST system in whatever language you want. The way you connect those two systems is by using something like JSON data, which can be transferred and understood by both sides. So that's why JSON is super important, especially when we start building either multi-tiered architectures, like 3-tier architectures where you have a presentation layer and a data layer and a persistence layer, or it's just microservices. Like even microservice systems work that way. So where was I? So your server can work with any self-describing data architecture, right? Whether it's SQL, NoSQL, JSON, XML, even some ad hoc solutions like a flat file solution that somebody creates. However, your client-side scripting language has limitations. It only works natively with XML and JSON data at best, right? And our working language currently that we're working with prefers JSON over XML. So the stack that we're working in, which is the MERN stack, which is Mongo, Express, React, and Node, definitely favors JSON as being a part of that stack. And the cool thing about it is you don't have to actually parse our JSON into actual JavaScript objects. It happens automatically in React, and it also happens automatically on the Node side. So if we require, like we're going to do in a few minutes, if we require a JSON data structure, it will actually take that JSON data structure and automatically format it for us into JavaScript objects, and then we can just easily query that JavaScript data structure. So why JSON is preferred, or JSON? It depends on how you say it. Some people say JSON, or some people say Jason, but it's not Jason. It's not a name, it's JSON. JSON is a clear and fast data language. JSON stands for, do you guys know what JSON stands for? Does anybody have an idea? I'll give you a hint. The first word is JavaScript.
JavaScript object orientation notation.
Yep, that's exactly it. JavaScript.
I almost said oriented.
That's good enough though. JavaScript object notation is exactly what it stands for, and it basically describes a data object. That's the whole idea. Object notation. It's notating what the object is, which can allow the JavaScript API to interact natively with that object. So JavaScript, when you load in JSON, it actually just interprets it automatically. It knows exactly what it's looking at because it's in the format of an actual object. And if you've ever built an object from scratch in JavaScript, you will notice the similarities between it and JSON. It is superior to XML. That might be an opinionated opinion because it already is an object and doesn't need to go through any processing to become an object. So XML has to be formatted, interpreted, and parsed into an object in other languages, including PHP and stuff like that. You have to parse through them. In PHP, though, you do have to parse with JSON as well. You will remember when we created an object literal during our objects lesson. So now you guys didn't have me for intro to JavaScript, so that doesn't actually apply to you, but likely you did create object literals. And I think we created an object literal in class 1, in this class, like lesson 1. There are, however, some rules. So there are supported data types and unsupported data types. The good news is, like, almost all of them are supported, right? So strings, integers, floats, booleans, arrays, and other objects are completely supported as data types within the JSON structure. However, you cannot add a function to JSON notation, at least not as a functional function, right? You can't add methods. It just doesn't understand them. It won't understand class declarations, stuff like that. So it's just data. That's really all you can add. I have seen people add functions to it, but they have to first basically stringify the function, and then they run evals on it, which is not safe. But that's the only way I've ever seen that work with a function. So working with JSON data. So creating a JSON data structure is fairly simple. We just have to describe our data. We can use strings, numbers, booleans, arrays, objects, as well as nested structures. So you can actually nest more objects or nest arrays to get the best possible description as possible. In the example below, which you can't see because it's currently on my screen, I will zoom in for you though. So in the example below, I have described a person. So you can see here, this is an array, which makes a perfect sense because I'm likely going to have more than one person in my JSON structure. I will likely have many people. So in this thing here, you can see how it describes. So the array basically indicates that I can have more than one person object. The person object you see here is the one denoted with these curly braces. That's our object. Notice how it looks a lot like a JavaScript object, right? So this then describes the details about this person inside here. So I have these properties, which are denoted by the quotations, right? So those are the keys or the properties. So I have ID, name, username, email, and address as my top level properties. The ID for this particular person is 1. The name is Leanne Graham. The username is Brett, which I don't know how Brett associates with Leanne, but whatever. Her email address is sincere@april.biz. And then they have an address. The address is a nested object, right? So the address's data type is also an object. And that object contains its own properties and its own values as well. It also contains another nested object describing the geolocation of this particular person's address information, which is just another nested object with properties and values as well. JavaScript notation is not hard to work with. It doesn't take very long to understand what it's doing and how it works, but understanding that it's intrinsically important to use, I think that's the part that takes a bit of time for people. They don't understand that they have this tool available to them that they can use in order to create better systems, right? Better communication between systems. So we're going to not do all this stuff that it says here. We're going to work with the JSON that I'm going to give you. Now, did I publish it in here? No, I didn't. That's kind of annoying. Let me grab the JSON because I don't want you to have to type it out. That would be obnoxious. Hold on. I know I have it in one of my files here. Nope. There we go. All right. What I'm going to do is just create a paste bin for it. Go. Don't care about syntax highlighting. Create a new paste. There you go. All right. So in our application, in the data folder, we're going to create a new file called data.json. And then what I would like you to do is go to the paste bin. Continue to the external site. Not sure why I did that. And if you click on raw, like this little raw tab up here, you can just click in your window here, hit Control-A, Control-C, and then paste your data inside here.
Sorry, Sean.
Yeah.
It says when I clicked on the link, like error 404 or 401 error.
You got a 404 error when you clicked the link? You didn't get this, did you? The external site?
Yeah, I clicked that and it continued to say found error.
Okay. I don't know if I can do
I'm not sure
file.
why it's not working.
Yeah, is anybody else having an issue accessing that paste bin? No? Okay. Let me try a different site. Let's try JS Fiddle or something. JS Fiddle is not the right location for this stuff. Can I share a file? Never tried to actually share a file in WebEx. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna see.
No, it's working now. It's working now. It's okay.
Okay. No worries. Okay, so this JSON, hold on. Will this JSON file be accessible directly from the browser, or in order to view this data, must you write JS to display it? Because it's not actually getting written into... Oh, no, it will get written into the public folder. I'm actually not 100% sure, Leo. I think when we build it, we can build it when we're done. If we build it, it might possibly take the data from the JSON, make it like raw text and write it into the source folder, or it might just copy the data.json to the public folder. If it copies it to the public folder, then yes, it's 100% accessible from the client. Actually, technically, it's always accessible, even if it flattens it and uglifies it and does whatever it's going to do to it. It's always accessible. So I think what you're getting at is, no, you don't want to put secure data inside a flat file in JSON. That would be a very bad idea, right? Instead, this is a proof of concept that you can load from a JSON file. However, you would likely work, if you're working with React and you're working with a REST API, you're going to do everything through authentication, right? This is just a proof of concept that it works. Let's describe quickly what's happening here. Now, you can collapse these things because I know they get kind of muddled. You can just click the little arrows. I think it's only 10, I believe it's only 10 records. It's not very many. It didn't dump like an entire database's worth of records. So we can take a look. We've got Leanne. You've seen these pieces, but you'll notice that we have a few other pieces as well. We have her phone number, her website address, and some company information in here as well. We don't have very many data types in this one. Like, we're not looking at numbers or anything, but that's fine. It'll work anyways. Okay, cool. So in our local data.jsx, so we have our data.json in the same folder as the data folder. In our local data.jsx, we need to import this file. So we're going to, we also need to import the layout. Hold on. So we will import layout from /shared layout, like so. Layout is just it's like a partial that kind of loads some stuff around our stuff, which is handy. Our stuff around our stuff, that's real descriptive, eh? And then we're going to import our data from data.json. Now, the cool thing in React is when you import data, when you import JSON in React, it automatically becomes an object. It's immediately a JavaScript object. It does not need to be pre-parsed. So we can actually work with it right out of the gate. Now, we're going to be smart because we don't want to load this data over and over again every time our component refreshes. We're just going to store the data using useMemo. So up here in React, we're going to import useMemo. And then inside our component, we'll create a variable called users. We'll use memo, which takes a function call. And we'll store it with data and nothing else. And what that basically will do is make sure that users doesn't reload that data each time. We get it, it's in there, we're done. There's no more reloading after this point. We just stick with the same data. So the next thing we want to do is build our view so that we can see this. And we're going to have an error right now because we're not returning anything in the way of JSX, but we're going to return our layout with the title equal to data local. And then that should fix it. So now we can see data local up here as our title. This component, by the way, is just a component that I created that's custom. You're welcome to take a look at it and dissect it if you want to. So we're going to create some bootstrap cards to show our data. So there's quite a bit of like HTML to write here, but it'll go pretty quick. So I'm going to create a div with the row and the my5 classes. And I'm taking advantage of Emmet. If I just type the name div and I do .row.my-5 and then hit tab, it will auto create the element for me with those class names. So this is going to create a new row each time with a new card in it. Now I want to iterate over this data. Users is an array, and to iterate over it, you might be wanting to do something like a for loop. Unfortunately, React doesn't support that. You can't use for loops in React JSX. So instead, we have to use a higher order function, and obviously one of the iteratives. So you could use for each. A lot of people use for each, but the most common one that I've seen is map. People tend to just like to use map. So we'll use map just because that tends to be mostly what's in the wild. The way I write this, I'm just going to collapse my sidebar. The way I write this is in a way so that it's kind of like done in baby steps, so it's doesn't become confusing when we start separating things out. So I'm going to do users, right? So that's the name of our data here. Dot map, and I'm going to start with that. And I'm putting it in the curly braces so it translates it as JavaScript. Then inside the argument for map, it takes a function, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is give it some arguments, then the arrow, and then I'm not using curly braces though, I'm going to use the explicit return. So to denote explicit return, I'm using parentheses. If you use curly braces, then you have to explicitly return. So the difference being that you would have to actually add the word return. This will implicitly return, meaning it will return on its own. Now I'm ready to add the arguments themselves. So I'm going to add user, which is the current instance that I'm working with, and I. I is the index. So array takes two possible arguments. One is the item that you're currently popping off the array, and then the second one is the index of that item. We need I because React gets kind of mad when you load in the same components, or so the same elements over and over again, and they're not unique. So we have to provide a key to make them unique. So that's why we use I. This is a very important concept to understand, so hopefully you guys are still with me. So I will copy that and paste that for you. There you go. That's our good starting point. And then I'm going to put my cursor between these two parentheses. So notice that there's two parentheses and a curly brace at the end and one parenthesis before it. And I'm going to hit enter. And this is where I'm going to write my JSX. And what will happen is on each iteration, it will produce this JSX in the browser, providing these details to it as values for dynamic data. You can kind of think of it like PHP for each loops that you guys would have wrote way back. Div.className. Nope, not div.className. Div.col. That's what I want. Div.col will produce that for me. And then I'm going to add another attribute called key and provide it with the letter I. And that will stop React from freaking out. Otherwise, it will freak out and say, these things are all the same. They have to be unique, and the I will always be unique because it's an index. Now I can add the next one, which will be div.card.my-2. So that will put two classes in for me. See, like so. And then I need to add one other attribute to that, and that is a style. So I do like to separate these when I get too many of them on the line. I find it makes it easier for you guys to read them, as well as easier for me to read them. Plus, it tends to be the common convention. So now style is kind of interesting. With style, you can give it a quoted like string like this, or you can take advantage of using JavaScript style notation. So the way that's done is you just pass in an object, and then you list the name in the JavaScript format, what the name of the CSS style is. It's pretty easy. So if there's a dash in it, you just make it camel case. That's how you remember. And then it takes a string for the value, which is 18 REM is what I'm going to use. So now you can see things are loading. We've got some things. Now I'm going to do div.card-body. And then inside it's going to take div.card-title. It's the only problem with Bootstrap components is you wind up with like so many nested layers. And then in there, we're actually going to write a value. So we're going to put an h3 in there with some JavaScript translation, user.name, which is pulling from this user value up here. So now if I hit save, you'll see that we have peoples. Look at all the peoples. And while I'm at it, I'm going to add their username underneath it in nice small text. So I'll do a small with user.username. Whoops. Let's put the curly brace in the right direction. And now you can see it shows their name with their lowercase name underneath, or their username underneath. Now, card title is its own self-contained component inside JavaScript, or inside Bootstrap. I'm going to add another one. This one will be the card text. So I'm going to do card.text. I wonder if I can just do .card.text, and if Emmet... Oh, yes, it does. Emmet loads it automatically as an abbreviation. No, it didn't. It shoved it on the outside. I lied. Didn't quite work the way I wanted it to. I bet you it would if I had not screwed it up in the first place. So strong. We're going to add address here.
Sean, are you able to copy and paste some of what you're doing into the chat for those that are falling a bit behind?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
No problem. So now you can see there's address on each of the cards there. And now what we can do is we're going to do another mapping, but this time it's a little bit different. If you looked at address, address is an object, and we can't iterate over an object using map. Map is specifically for arrays only. But what we can do is actually convert our object into an array. And I think this is one of those times where it actually makes sense to kind of show you what that looks like in its simplest way. Let me just undock this for a second. There we go. And I'm just going to turn warnings off because they annoy me. There. All right, so I'll just dock this over to the left-hand side and zoom in a little bit. Make it senior size. I'm also going to shrink this down a little bit because we've got no room over here and tons of room over here. All right, so I'm going to create an object, just a super simple object. I'll make it so that you can actually see things that are relevant instead of just ABC like I usually do. And we'll just call this OBJ. There we go. Simple object, right? If I try to map over an object, you'll notice that it automatically produces an error. I get obj.map is not a function, and that's because objects don't work the same way as arrays do. Even though arrays are technically objects, they have an iterative on them. They have the iterative, they inherit from iterative, sorry. So they have the ability to be able to be iterated over. But there is a way that we can actually iterate over this object. Now you have seen this method for let I in obj, right? You've seen that, and we can console log dot or I, right? And all that will do is spit out the keys. So you've seen that way. That kind of works. We could do something similar to that, but we can't really do it in React because we're not allowed to use the for methods in React. So we can't use for in or for of, for example, or any type of for. So a way around that is to kind of convert the object into an array. So it actually becomes an array of arrays. So we use the object class, and then we use a function from it called entries, and then we pass it the object we want to work with. And you'll notice that it produces this array of arrays. And each array has the key as the index 0 and the value as the index 1. So you can see here, age is index 0, 42 is index 1, whoops, and married is index 0, and true is index 1. So now that it's an array, I can go ahead and map over it. So I can do, what I can do is object.entries.map, like so, right? Whoops, I have to pass the obj to it. There we go. So obj. So now I've got map. Map takes a function, right, with some values. So here we go. We've got our function. And I can pass it item, but if I pass it just item like so, and I was to console log item, for example, I think I need one more. There we go. As you can see, it's just going to spit them out individually. But using destructuring, we can get pretty cool with this stuff. So what I can do with destructuring is I can destructure key and value out of it, like so. And then I can pass key and value, like so. And as you can see, now I've got the properties and their values next to them. And I have the access to each of these individually. So that's what we're going to do with the address, because if you look at the address information, we have all of these like street, suite, city, zip code, geo. I don't want to have to type those out and then individually access them. I'd rather just iterate over this object and produce the stuff that I need to produce. So let's go back to localdata.jsx, and we'll take this nice and slow. First, let's create our curly braces to translate the JavaScript. That's step 1. Step 2 is to type in object.entries, spelling entries correctly. That's step 2. Now we'll plug the argument into entries. The argument we're going to plug in is user.address, because that is an object. I think we'll shrink this even more, actually. There we go. Oh, this didn't shrink, which is weird. There, that's shrunk. That's better. All right, now I'm going to do .map, which is a function. And map, as we know, takes a function as an argument. So what we'll do is we will write our function as the argument. Sorry, we'll do it with an explicit return. Or sorry, implicit return. So parentheses, not curly braces. And then the argument I'm going to provide it is a destructured item. So key and value. Because you'll remember, this turns this into an array of arrays. So now I can grab the key, which will be the first item in the array, and value, which will be the second item in the array. These don't have to be called key and value. You could call this label and value or whatever. Doesn't matter. You don't have to use value, though. You could call it Bob if you want to. Now I'm ready to hit enter and type in some JSX in this location. So I'm going to create a fragment. And I'm going to add a strong tag here. And in the strong tag, I'm going to add the key and a non-blank space. Or non-breaking space, sorry. What that basically does, I don't know if you guys know what this is, it stops the browser from breaking this up across 2 lines. It will force it to stay within the 2 lines. Then I'm going to add my value, and then just a break tag. So I'll copy this fancy code. Hold on. Objects are not valid as React children. Oh, right, because a key is Latin long. That's true. The problem there is the geotag. How do I get past? Oh, right. We have to actually perform a bit of a calculation. So we're in here. We need to do a type of value equals string. So basically what we need to do is verify that whatever the value is that we're working with is a string and not a, what's the word I'm looking for? Not an object or an array or something like that. So now we just take this code here and plug it into here. And then that stops that from happening. I'll paste this because I know this is a bit tricky. There, now it looks proper. See? So we don't get the geo information, but we do get the rest of the information. So I'll copy all of this. And paste it in here for you. So it's funny that it says address street all as one word, and there are ways that we could resolve that by doing some, we could look at the data.json and figure out some better ways to actually display that. Well, that's probably because address is at the top there like that, which is weird. We need a breaking tag here. Why don't we add a break next to address? Whoops. Like so, and then address is up there now, and now it says street, suite, city, zip code. Really want to get fancy, we could also add an HR tag in there. So now there's a line underneath address. So let's recap what's happening. So in our system right now, we are actually accessing the data that is dynamically loading on this page from this data.json that I provided, right? So the data.json, we can cross-reference it here. So you can see we've got Leanne Graham. Yep, Leanne Graham. Her username is Brett. There's Brett. Her address information is Kula Street, apartment 556 in Gwenborough, and her zip code is 92998-3874. We're not publishing the geolocation information. We're not publishing her email address or her ID, but we could if we wanted to because that data is available to us under the user. The next piece that we want to look at is just how we're actually iterating through all this information. So we're using a higher order function called map. Map allows us to iterate over arrays only, right? So what we do is we take the user's array. So that's if you look at the data.json, here I'll load it up on the other side so it's easier to see. If we look at the data.json, here's our array, and it's an array of objects, right? So as we iterate, the first time we access user, it's going to be the first object in our array. Hopefully that is not new information. You guys fully understand how arrays and iterating over arrays works by this point. And then the second time we iterate over will be into our next object, right? This one. And we'll just keep doing that till we run out of objects to iterate over. So we have our user, and then the second value that we're passing as an argument that map will autofill for us when it calls this function is the index. And we need that because we have to provide a unique key for React. React expects this key to exist. If I take the key out and save it, we will get a warning inside our console window. Each child in a list should have a unique key property. That's caused by when we're producing a list of children, which is exactly what's happening. We're creating a list of div call, and we need to give each one of them a unique value. Oops, hitting Control Z in the wrong spot. Now in there we create a card, right? Card is just the Bootstrap card that exists on Bootstrap. You can go take a look at what that looks like. We're using a card title, and this is where we finally start accessing our data. So user here is the same user that we're accessing here, and here, and here, right? It's all the same user. In this one, we're just accessing simple top-level properties. We're accessing the name, and we're accessing the username, right? And that's what's publishing Leanne Graham and Brett. Further down, we want to iterate over the address, but like I said, because the address is an object, and objects are not interpretive in a map, the map function is not available to them, the only way around it is by actually kind of casting our object to an array. And basically what it does is it just takes these properties and values and turns them into a nested array, essentially, right? And then each of these become a nested array. So obviously we don't want to deal with them as individual array values. So what we do is we use destructuring, which we learned in lesson 1. If destructuring is still something difficult, I recommend reviewing that because it will be on the test. We use destructuring and destructure our value, our property and value into key and value, and then we pass that into this block, this explicit or implicitly returned block. In here, we're just doing a quick check to see whether or not the value is type string. So the reason why we're doing that is because we only want to output strings. We don't want to accidentally try to output an object, or as you saw, we get an error. React will not implicitly output an object. There's no way for it to. So we don't want to do that accidentally. So instead what we're doing is we're checking to see if it's a string, and we're using a ternary to do this. Can I collapse this? Kind of collapse this. So we check to see if it's a string. If it is, we execute this code here. Otherwise, we just return null, which means it won't return any value whatsoever or output any value whatsoever. Inside the fragment that we've created here, if everything is good, it happens to be a string, we output the key and we output the value. I realize this is quite confusing. This part here is not going to be on any tests, so don't worry about it, but I want you to be aware of it because it is a very common strategy used in React in order to output objects of data, right? And it's often that you'll be working with objects of data. So this is something that I definitely recommend understanding, not even just for React, for any type of JavaScript structure that you're working with, okay? It's not like PHP where you can just kind of like for each over it and grab the property and the key and the value all in one go. With React, or with JavaScript in general, you have to find a way to destructure that object to do that. Cool. Any questions? Because this is a good point for a break. No? So the API version of this is going to go super, super fast. But we'll take a break, get a drink, have a coffee, whatever it is that you need to do for your break, and then we'll resume at 4:15. All right? All right. All right, I guess we'll start again. Okay, cool. So that was local data that we covered. So we basically required our data file, and then using our data file locally, we pulled it in, which automatically gets converted into a JavaScript object. And then we just work with that JavaScript object like we would any object dynamically inside our content. However, like I was telling Leo, this is definitely not common. You might do stuff like this if you just need a config file that doesn't contain any real, sensitive data in it. This is very common to do, right? It's very common to have a config file that you would use inside your React application where you're pulling values from it for your config. But it's not common if you're doing sensitive data that you're trying to access, right? Most of that stuff you would put on a remote server, and then you would use authentication to be able to access it. We're going to use a remote server. However, we're not going to do it sensitively. Like, we're not storing sensitive data, so we're not going to need to do any authentication. But we do need to add some stuff. So just like we did in our navigation the last time, so if you can navigate to shared navigation.jsx, and we might as well just copy this one this time. So I'm just going to copy the last one we created. I'm just going to hit Alt Shift and down. That duplicates it. And then I'm going to change this to remote data, and obviously change the link to remote as well. And I'll click on remote. Now, I'm definitely, we're going to be literally working with the exact same data. It just happens to be in an API somewhere. So instead of us rebuilding all of that HTML again, we'll just duplicate our local data file. So if you hit Control-C, Control-V, it duplicates, right? And then all you have to do is just rename it. So I'm going to rename mine to remote data. And then we'll just start with that file and we'll add in our data sources. Like I said, the remote data lesson does not take nearly as long as the other one did. All right, so once you've written your link out, I'm just going to dock it over to the left. I'm going to open up router.jsx on the left. Sorry, I'm going to dock it to the right. And in my router.jsx, I'm going to just duplicate the path, the last one that we created on line 18. So Alt Shift and down, change that to remote, and change the component to remote data, and then make sure I import it up top. Whoops. So this line, and this line. I'll give you a few minutes to get that in there. I know it takes... I tend to type really fast, and I take full advantage of the IDE's capabilities. So when it hints, I hit tab, if it's the right hint, right? And you get fast at that the more you use it. Hopefully you guys are getting used to the shortcut keys like Alt-Shift and Alt-Down and all that type of stuff. Control-D, multi-cursor. Definitely improves your efficiency. All right, anybody still typing, or can I move into that file? All right, I'm going to take it at face value. I'm going to just move the router JSX over to this screen over here so you guys can see it. And I'm going to open up the remote data.jsx, which looks exactly the same as our other one. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of VS Code's code folding. I'm just going to fold this code so that you can see the local data. And I'll show you a cool shortcut. I'm going to double click on the word local data so it becomes highlighted. And then I'm going to hit Control and D, which will select the other one. So now they're both selected. As you can see, there's two cursors. And I'm just going to change them to remote data. Not that it matters. The system doesn't care that they're called remote data because it's just going to import them as remote data anyways. But I want them to be called remote data for context. Make sure you click the remote data link. Right now it's loading in that data from JSON here. Line 3 we can get rid of altogether. We don't need line 3 because line 3 is pulling in local data. We don't have local data, so we'll save it. And if you did it correctly, it should break. The application should bust. So all we've done is rename the component and made sure that we renamed it for the export, right, so that it's exporting properly. And we've removed the data JSON require that we had in there. All right, time to expand. So right now we're using user's memo like this, and that's fine. All this code in here is fine. We're not going to touch any of this code. So if you want, you can even collapse the layout altogether. Just collapse it using the little code folder. Everything we're going to build is up here in this part. So what I want to do is I want to pull the data from an endpoint, and I need to be able to store it as well. Now I can't pull from an endpoint without using libraries. I think we don't have Axios available to us, so we need to install it. Hold on, let me just check the package file. Yes, we don't have Axios. Okay, so we're going to install Axios. Axios is a library that you can use to be able to make remote calls. Now, you guys might have used Fetch when you did your Intro to JavaScript class. Axios is a little cleaner. It's nice, but it also supports async and await, which is pretty cool. So we're going to use Axios. So the first thing I'm going to do is kill my server. And then I'm going to npm install. No, I'm not. We're using yarn. I'm going to yarn add Axios. And I'll copy that for you because I realize this is kind of tiny. I don't know why it's so tiny. See? Control V. There you go. And once you put that in there, you're going to hit enter and let it add the Axios package to our application. And then once it's added Axios, go ahead and do yarn start, which will boot up in here. And we should still have a failed app, which is fine. Now we can require Axios. So I'm just going to do an import Axios from Axios. Like so. Now we're going to use the hook useEffect in order for us to access Axios and create a request through the browser to our endpoint, grab our data, and bring it back. The DOM has to be loaded for this to work, so we're definitely going to use useEffect because then we can guarantee that. In addition, once we get that data, we need to be able to store it because we want to be able to access it from the users here. So what we'll do is we'll use state and store it in the useState variable. That will automatically make this line just work. It will just work out of the box after that, and then all of our code will populate properly. So we're going to actually import useState up here with our use memo. So I'm going to do comma useState. So that's pulling in the useState hook for us. And then I'm going to do const with my square brackets, and we're going to call this state variable data, right? So we don't have to make any changes in our code. And the setter we'll just call set data. And then it's equals use state. And we'll give it an empty array because right now our system is iterating over an array. So an empty array will result in exactly that, a blank page. This says data local. We can fix that by just changing out the layout title from local to remote, and that will change it to remote for us. So all I've done so far is I've imported useState and I've imported Axios. And then I changed the title on here and I added my state variable piece. I'll even copy my state variable piece and paste it. Now I want to use effect, so I need to import it as well. So I'll import useEffect with useState and useMemo, right? And then I'll use effect here. And useEffect takes two arguments. One is a callback function. And the second one is a list of things that you want to listen to for their state changes. And the things that we're going to be listening to for state changes are data and set data. Then I'm going to put my cursor between the curly braces and split them apart. We don't actually need to use async with Axios here because it's just going to do it when it does it, and when it's done, it's going to set the data for us, and that's just the way callbacks kind of work. So it doesn't matter. We don't have to wait around. So I'm going to do axios.get. Get is the HTTP method that we're using. Axios supports get and post as well as other ones, but we're using get and post. Now I need to give it the address of the endpoint. So this is the API endpoint that I'm using. I'll paste it in here for you. That's the API endpoint. Please copy it and use it. And then on my next line, I'm going to do .then because this will return a promise and I need to react once the promise has been returned. So the way promises work is that once this is done doing whatever it's doing, it executes the code that goes in between these brackets, which is always a callback function. It returns some sort of thing, so we're going to assume it's returning response. That's what we're just going to call it. And then in the callback function, we can go ahead and do whatever it is we want to do. So we're just going to set data with response.data. So Axios returns back a response, and the response object contains a lot of information in it about your request. However, the only thing you really care about is the data portion of it. You don't care about the rest of it. And then the last thing we need to do is just fix our memo line. Our memo line right now is not listening for changes in data. So we need to add the change of data here inside the square brackets. And then save, and you should see our stuff. So I'll copy all of that for you. So let's just walk through that again, exactly what's happening. So we're using a state variable because we're going to create an API request, grab some data, and bring it back. When our module updates, we want to make sure that we have that data inside this data field. We don't want to lose it by not using a state variable. We're using useMemo because once that's happened once and we update our component, we don't need to do the whole process again of rewriting state. It's not necessary. useEffect happens once the DOM has loaded, and that's when we want to perform our Axios request. Our Axios request is going to reach out to this endpoint. Once it's retrieved the data, it's then going to return it as a response, which we're just going to store in this variable called resp. And then from there, we're going to access the data property from it and set our data with that data property, essentially setting the value here, right? And then once that happens, that's going to satisfy this data here, and then everything just takes over. Axios is stuck in a loop and is making requests after request. Not sure if I introduced a logic flaw. Let me just double check and make sure that's not what I just introduced. Let's check the network tab. Oh yeah, no, I definitely introduced it. Hold on, maybe it is the listener. Yes, remove those two pieces from the listener. Yeah. That was not a you thing, that was a me thing. So this listener, what it's supposed to do is rerun this code when the event changes, which, I mean, if you think about it, Axios, then call then sets data, data changes, we're listening to data, so that executes this again. And then it does the same process. Data changes, executes again, and again, and again. Which is great if you're trying to pull, but not so great when you're not trying to pull. Not to mention GitHub's probably kind of annoyed with us right now. So that's it. That's data in a nutshell. Now you might be like, okay, well that wasn't very exciting. And it isn't very exciting because we're not doing much with an API. We're only doing a very tiny little bit with this API. But despite the fact that it's not exciting, it is an important concept to understand. Because once we build our node back end, and not next week or the following week, but the following week after that, we're going to start building our node REST API. And this concept, this little chunk of code, we're going to type lots because we're going to be accessing our REST API and loading data from it. So that's where this concept is going to come into play. Any questions about any of this stuff? So the good news is this remote data stuff will not be on the test, but the local data might be. Okay? Just keep that in mind. You may have a question regarding remote data, or local data, but not remote data. You won't have to deal with remote data. And if it has data in it, I will give you the data, and you'll be working with that data. Okay? So don't worry too much about it. Yes, so let's talk about the project. I know that's something you guys want to talk about. Let me open the project up. Let's, just for those that are still writing code, I'll just move that over a bit. Here, we'll just dock that. Oops. There we go. Okay, so under the shell for D2L, you will find a folder down here called React Project. If you click on it, that will show you the React project. So there's two projects in this class in total. There's a React project and a Node project, right? They don't have to work together. I mean, if you want to build them so that eventually you can connect it to your React or your Node project, I would definitely recommend that, especially if you go out into the workforce and you're looking for a job in React and Node, then it's definitely worth your time. Incidentally, for those, I had a student a while ago say, is there really that much money in JavaScript if so many people are learning it? To give you an idea, a graduate from your program in 2017 just got a job with Jane.com that pays $150,000 per year. So yes, there is definitely jobs, and they do definitely pay well. So just keep that in mind. Also, AWS, well, Amazon in general, looks for people with React and Node experience. Prodigy Games is a really big hirer and a very big payer that look for Node and React developers as well. Front-end developer who's strong in React and Node could expect upwards of over $100,000 easily. Not in their first year, but even then, once you get out, if you're familiar with this and you're strong at it, you should be at least asking for 60K on average. So just keep that in mind. It definitely pays well. Java also pays well, though. There's definitely no end of Java jobs. Just don't become a PHP developer unless you really want to be broke most of your life. Unless you learn Magenta. Sorry, I should express that. If you learn Magenta, you'll make money all day long because there's not enough of them, and there's many, many e-commerce carts out there that use Magenta. All right, so React project. The objective. Using a combination of Create React app. That's important. I know some of you are like, hey, I know how to totally roll out a React system without ever touching Create React app, and I'm happy for you. But you're going to use Create React app here. At my co-op in the summer, they use Laravel. Is it not popular? Laravel can be popular. I like Laravel, actually. I don't hate it. There's a company in Aurelia called CareDove, and they're a big hirer as well. Like they're not a startup. They're also not some small web shop either. Like they're a big company. CareDove, I think, has moved from using the Yi framework, like YII, over to Laravel. And they're looking for Laravel developers as well, I believe. And their starting wage, I believe, is $50,000. But that's because it's Aurelia. So Aurelia is a little bit lesser money. But I mean, $50,000 for a junior position isn't too terrible. But yeah, the idea is WordPress. Don't learn WordPress. Don't become a WordPress developer because you'll never make money. WordPress is a terrible thing to get into, unless you want to move to Toronto, right? If you want to move to Toronto, you'll probably make more money there. Yeah, they did WordPress too. Yeah, I hate it too. WordPress has serious flaws that people don't realize. Like, you're really at the mercy of the people who make the plugins, and if they're a crap coder, you're going to have a lot of problems. Like, a lot of problems. Anyways, so you're going to use a combination of the Create React app, React Router. So you need to make sure React Router is implemented into your application. Component design. So I don't want to see some monolithic file with 100 lines in it. I want them to be logically separated into individual components. And data APIs. So you will create a small React application that allows a user to interact with some data. Now, it just says data APIs. I am not providing you a data API. You need to go do your own research, find your own data API, and implement it into your React application. There are some limitations there. So there's something called CORS, which stands for Cross-Origin Requests. And it can be a pain in the butt, because what it can do is it can make it so that you can't access an API unless you're registered and approved. However, that being said, there are tons and tons and tons of open source APIs that don't require you to use CORS whatsoever. They're just completely open-ended. One that I've used is the Chuck Norris quote API, which is pretty good. Matt Bass's insult generator is pretty good. There's a few of them that I've used that you could connect to and pull your API data from them. Okay? So you are going to have to do some research in order to find those. But yes, I want you to have a data API. That being said, it doesn't have to be remote. If you want to create a data JSON file and load in the JSON file from that instead, that is fine as well. I will accept either. Okay? Yeah, which it says right here. You may use an existing data API or using Axios, right? So you can use either one. It doesn't matter. So your requirements: full React application with the following accessible pages. So each of these are worth 10%, right? You're going to have a home page and an about page, and we're going to create that in a little bit. Not the actual content, but we'll create the structure for it. You're going to have a data page. You can name this after the data you're working with, right? That's kind of called resource naming. So you can think of your data as a resource that you're accessing, and your data page should be named after that resource. This will also house your interactive components, which you are required to have 2 interactive components in total. I don't care what those interactive components do so much. They can sort, they can search, they can filter, they can isolate. You can do any of those things in your interactive components. Or they can perform CRUD operations, so create, read, update, or delete. That gets a lot trickier in React because you don't have file system access. So I would actually ignore that and not even go down that road. because it would be a real pain in the butt unless you can find an API that's remote that you're connecting to that allows you to be able to do those things. Which, incidentally, if you do yourself a favor and make sure your repository is private. Oh, wait, no, you can't. Yeah, just avoid the CRUD altogether. Because I don't want you guys accidentally publishing API keys. That would be bad. So just sort, search, filter, isolate, or any other type of interactivity that you think you can implement. They have to be components on their own. So they're individual components. So you must use props and state to manage state between components, and you must use at least one other hook. So state and props, and then memo, or reference, or context provider, or something, right? You have to use another, or use effect. You'll likely very much use effect. So you must use another type of hook. You must use a create app library to create the application. You cannot use an existing application, okay? That includes code from lynda.com, Coursera, or something like that, because I've had people do that. And also tutorials. I've had so many people follow tutorials on the internet and then hand that in as their code. It is extremely obvious that you've done that, and unfortunately it is academic misconduct. It's considered academic misconduct. It has to be your own original idea, okay? Submission. All pages must be clean and legible, meaning that, at this point in semester 4, things should be tabbed in properly. Not everything should be butted up against the left-hand side or all over the place willy-nilly, right? I do expect CSS, right? So you must have CSS implemented, but you are welcome to use a CSS framework like Material or Bootstrap. So don't stress out if you're not a designer, that's fine. Just use, go use a theme, right? That's totally cool. You must submit a repository link, and this is super important, you must submit a live link to your application using Netlify. That's why I said don't bother doing CRUD, because if you do find an API that supports CRUD, it's likely going to come with an API token and a secret, and both of those are secure, and you don't want to publish those to the internet. That would be bad. Penalties. So pay special attention to this portion, please. 20% if your application doesn't work. So in semester 4, I tend to ding a little harder for non-functioning applications. Make sure your application works. 20% is quite a heavy loss, especially considering you're also going to get deductions when I find the code that doesn't work. You're going to lose points for that too. So 100% if you are missing a repository link, this is non-negotiable. In semester 4, you need to be able to use Git. Sorry, you have to be able to use Git and GitHub. It's a requirement. So make sure you have your link up on, make sure you have your code up on your repository and that you've shared your GitHub link. 30% if you're missing the live link. So that's a pretty hefty mark. Netlify is super easy. If you have issues deploying to Netlify, please let me know. One thing to note about Netlify is if your application, your React application, is throwing warnings, you need to fix them because Netlify won't let you deploy your code if there's warnings, okay? You can tell Netlify not to do that, but it will be up to you to research how to do that and add the necessary configuration file. That's my hint. Or just fix the warnings. That's the best way to do it. 100% if you don't use the Create React App library to generate your application. That is a requirement because you need to know how to use that, and so that you have experience with scaffolding. And then also 100% loss if you submit a tutorial online education project, example project. Your project must be unique. Must be a unique application you created yourself. Okay, so that's super important. And then for some reason, this guy kind of got as a straggler as I was doing that type of stuff. Bonuses. Everybody always asks me about bonuses because, as you know, I like to give bonuses, or at least hopefully you know that now. Bonuses are based on thinking outside the box. So, for example, if you implement something that we haven't learned in class and you get it working, and what I always recommend is build your application first with the minimum requirements, create your repository, add that to your repository, and then create a new branch and create whatever feature you're going to do on that new branch. And once it's working, merge it into your existing branch and then provide that link. That way, if you run out of time or it just doesn't work, you don't wind up losing, 20% for a non-working application because you lost too much time based on trying to do something new. But yes, I do encourage you to do something new, though. So definitely think outside the box. Try to implement something new. It's up to 20% bonus. So that's a pretty hefty bonus. But of course, it requires you to impress me with your out-of-the-box thinking. If you were to use the provider, which we're not going to really touch on until next term, if you use the provider, that is also worth a bonus as well, but it's only 10%. Because we learned it in class, right? So depending on how you use it. Again, this is all subjective. It's based on what I think, what you've done, and how much I feel that it's impactful. Yeah. Any questions about the project stuff? No? Okay. Projects are individual. I was going to make them group. I did group last semester. But this time I think I'm going to make them individual just because you guys are in a university program and I feel that this is something you want to put in your portfolio for your jobs. You don't want to necessarily share that with somebody because I know as a hirer, my one question is going to be, okay, well, what did you do, right? Where this is better because then it just shows what you've done. So I feel like that's more important in your scenario. So yeah, these are individual, not group-based. Let's talk about the test before we move on to actually creating the beginning portions of our application for our project. So the test is going to be in 2 weeks, right? So not next week because of Family Day and Reading Week, but the following week is the midterm. The midterm, don't stress out about it, but definitely study. It'll be a very basic React site and it will be broken. Okay, so you will have all the things you need. You won't need to use Create React App. You won't need to install the packages. All that will be there for you. Okay, well, you will need to install them. You just won't need to add new ones. It will be there all for you. All you'll do is download from a repository link that I will provide you through GitHub. Everybody, so let me take it back a little bit. You'll come to class. You will go to Dropbox, you will click a link next to your name, and you will download that repository. You will take that code, you will open it up in your shell, and you will run npm install, or yarn install story, or just yarn. And then you will open up the code base and start going through the files. There'll be an instructions file in there that will tell you exactly what files have been affected, so you don't have to go climbing through, no crawling around looking for things. It'll tell you the 4 or 5 or 6 files that have been affected. Then you just go to those files. There'll be steps in those files that tell you explicitly what you need to do. And then you go resolve those issues. Okay? That's it. That's literally it. The goal is for it to be able to be done by me within 30 minutes, hopefully by you within an hour. But you have 3 full hours to be able to complete it. I am around to talk to, so I will have the WebEx open, so you're definitely welcome to join into the WebEx and talk to me. You don't have to, though. I'll have Slack open as well. But I don't answer questions that have already been taught. I will answer technical questions, like if you're having a technical issue. But if it isn't a technical issue, I don't provide support. If it's something like, hey, how do I install the modules? I will direct you to the lesson where we did it, and then you have to go figure it out yourself. So make sure you study, because not everything is just kind of spoon-fed to you, okay? Yeah. Any questions about any of that? No? Okie dokie. All right, let's create a brand new React app. So I'm going to close off some stuff. There we go. And I'm going to open a browser window over here as well, just so I have it. And I'm going to go to my Comp 2068 folder. And I'm going to go to this. And cool. Now I'm going to create a new file folder. And I'm just going to call it project. and double click into it. And then I'm going to right click in here and I'm going to choose to open git bash here. Now I'm going to create my React app. What's the command to create the React app? Oh boy. Did we forget? Ah, close enough. npx. Here, let me zoom in a bit. npx create React app, and then the name of the app that we want to create, which you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it project. Or I'll call it React project, actually, because that's what it is. So npx create React app, and I'm going to call mine React-project. You can call yours whatever you want. You can even rename it later. It's not a big deal. Once I've done that, I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to go and install all the things I need in order to do that. What? Which is behind the latest release. We no longer support global installation of Create React App. Please remove any global installs with one of the following commands. Wow. Are you serious? You can't open that? Is it Alt and click? Usually you can just click on it and do that. That's interesting. Yeah? But you just said I can't do that. Oh, okay. So they want us to uninstall it, which we do with npm, and then we have to install it and then run npx from that folder to ensure we're not globally installing it. Alright, so we're going to do Control-C on this, and I will paste that same thing into here. And we're going to run that. So that's going to uninstall it globally. And then I guess we have to install it. Oh, I guess we just use npx. Create React app. Oh, that's kind of cool. So I think create React app npx will just create it for us by reaching out to the module and doing it. Let's see. No, it doesn't work. Yeah, exactly. So I guess I have to npm install create React app locally within this folder, the project folder. That's annoying. Okay, so we have create React app in here. That's really goofy. Now npx create React app React project. Yeah, I don't like that at all. That's really dumb. So what this is doing now is it's basically marrying us to this project folder. Yes, we have the React project folder inside of it, which is fine, but now we've got this extra node modules and package lock. So that I'm not a big fan of. Unless I missed something. I think I did, though. Yeah, I'll put them out. So you are going to, first of all, run this uninstall. Then you're going to run npm install create React app. And then you're going to run npx create React app React project. So those three commands, Stella. And let me know once you guys see happy hacking. Once you see the happy hacking, you can go cd react project and cd into that directory. And then in your project folder, like inside your Finder or whatever, or your Explorer, just drill into it, right-click, and choose to open with code or whatever IDE you happen to be using. There we go. I'd prefer to move this out a little bit. I wish these things would properly do what they're supposed to do. There we go. That I don't want. This is what I want. There. So obviously there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff in here we don't need. Is anybody still installing and doing things before I move on? Okay. I'll wait for you to catch up there, Stella. That's fine. I just don't want to lose anybody. It's a good idea to start with this folder and this whole project React thing. It'll make life a little simpler for you. The goal is that we'll just create a home component and an about component for now. And then you guys can go forward with the other pieces that you need. And React Router DOM. We'll do React Router as well. So actually, why don't we do that as well? Because while you guys are doing that, we can actually install React Router DOM. So I'm just going to clear this. And then I'm going to type in yarn add React Router DOM. And I'm also going to install Bootstrap. Just because I want Bootstrap in mind. You don't have to install Bootstrap if you're not sure whether or not you're going to use Bootstrap yet. So that's the command I'm running. Don't install Bootstrap if you're not going to use it, because it's just extra bloat for no reason. And then once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and remove things that I'm not using. I'm not going to use this test file. This is under the source folder here. I'm going to remove app test, that test, the report web vitals, logo SVG, index.css, and app.css. So I'm going to remove these 5 files. So the only files I'm left with are the app.js and index.js, both which I'm going to rename to JSX so I can take advantage of the the syntax highlighting. So I've installed React Router DOM and Bootstrap, but you don't need to install Bootstrap unless you want to. And then in my source folder, I only have 2 files left over. I have app.jsx and index.jsx, which I renamed to .jsx because they start as JS. So hopefully you guys are still with me. So in my index file, I don't really need to do much. I do have to eliminate some of this extra stuff that we have. So I don't want this line with the report web vitals or the CSS line. And I don't want to use strict mode. Yeah, I don't want to use strict mode. And get rid of all of this extra junk. So that's all that I have in my file. Just React, React DOM, app, and I'm rendering the app. And there you go. And then in app.jsx, I mean, let's just do a purge. We'll just purge literally everything. Well, not everything, actually. Purge all of that. And we definitely don't want these things above, but we do want to import React from React. And we also want to import, I can never remember the name of it, from React Router DOM. I know it's browser something or other. This is the provider that wraps everything for our browser router. That's what it's called. Wraps everything so that we can use it with our thing. With our, why did it import twice? That's weird. So that we can use it with our routing. It wraps our router and becomes the provider for it. That's basically what it does under the hood. It's just a provider. And then we can add browser router in here. And we'll wrap our application in here with it. So we're going to have a shared component folder and we're first going to have a components folder. So we'll create a components folder in here. And inside we're going to add a new folder called shared. And in the shared folder, that's where we're going to put our new file called router.jsx, as well as our new our navigation.jsx. So in here we're going to have router.jsx. That's where all of our router stuff is going to go. And then we're going to have a new file called navigation.jsx. And obviously you don't have to marry yourself to what we do for a design for navigation. You can totally change it up and do whatever. I'm not even going to add any styling. We're literally just going to build the most basic navigation you've seen in your life. Is anybody lost? Have I lost anybody yet? Okay.
Sean, the components file folder that you made?
Yep.
It was components/shared. Is that what it was?
No, it's just components, and then the annoying thing is VS Code shoves the, like, if you don't have anything under components other than one other folder, it shoves it up into one line. So it looks like one folder called components/shared, but it isn't. It's components, and then inside components, there's another folder called shared. Hold on. There's actually a way for me to disable that.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know what? Just for context, I will disable that because it's so annoying that it does that. What do they call it? They call it folding? No. It's not called folding. It's not collapse. Or maybe it is collapse. It's sidebar something. I'll have to look it up, but there's a way to do it where you can actually stop it from doing that so that it creates the folder properly inside. It's just weird. It's very confusing for students. Oh, app.jsx. It's just this so far. I'll just copy and paste and provide it to you. Oh, I think I did provide it, didn't I? Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry about that, Leo. App.jsx. We're going to be adding more code to it. That's probably why I didn't post it yet. There. But I'll give you the starter. Yeah, no worries. All right, in our router.jsx file and the navigation.jsx file, we're going to create our components. But for those of you that are using VS Code, if you go to the extensions, you can install the React Snippets extension, which is, I can never remember the name of it. Oh, Simple React Snippets. That's what it's called. The cool thing about Simple React Snippets is you can type in IMR and it will automatically create the import for React for you. And then if you type in SFC, it automatically creates a component for you, which is super handy. So it's called Simple React Snippets. So you want to find that under your extensions and install it. And then I'll show you how it works. Under router.jsx, if you type in IMR and hit tab, it automatically imports the React statement for you. And then if you type in SFC, which is a stateless function component, it automatically creates the component and puts two cursors here for you to name it. So I'm going to call it router. And then if you hit tab, it automatically puts you into the argument statement so you can add your props if you have any. And if you hit tab again, it puts you into the return statement where you can hit enter and then start typing in your code, which is kind of handy. So I'll do that one more time so you know what I'm doing. So it's IMR. That's the import statement. You can see the hint for it. There's other ones too that actually import other stuff. And then it's SFC, which is the stateless function component. And then you just name it. Cool, eh? Nice and fast. So for the router, we need to import two things. We need the switch, and we need route. Actually, that I can never remember that one either. I think it's route. It's not router, I know that, because router is wrong. Yes, it's route. So this is where you're going to add your components, right? This is where all your components will live, is in this section. Now we're going to need a home component and an about component, which we need to create as well. We can create that under the components folder. So you'll notice as I hover over components, it's highlighted. But if I hover it over shared, it's highlighted, right? We want to hover over components, right-click on it, and choose New File. And this is called home.jsx. And then right-click on components again and choose New File. And this one's called about.jsx. That is so obnoxious. I hope those are actually going under the correct folder. They weren't. Yeah, you see, they weren't even creating under the correct folder. You might have to grab them and drag them so they become underneath the components folder. That is the worst design decision that VS Code has ever made. It didn't used to be like that. They changed it about a year ago, and it's really dumb. With the home and about components, again, we can just do IMR, SFC, call it home, and then just return null, because we're not going to fill these out today. So this one is home.jsx. Don't worry if you're missing some code from router. We're going to go right back to it in a few seconds here. And then I'm just going to copy this and paste it into about because they literally look the same. And just type in about. So now that we have our two components, the home and about component, in router.jsx, like I said, we're just coming right back to it. We can import our components. So I'm going to import home from dot slash home, and about from dot slash about. Hopefully you remember how the switch works. The switch works just like a switch in any programming language. It listens to a case and then executes when that case is true. This works a little bit differently though, because it's looking at the path values in your address bar, and then based on that path value, it will trigger a route. So we wrap the whole thing in a switch. We provide a route. We match an exact path. So in this scenario, I'm just going to do home, which will just be slash, right? And this can be whatever you want. It doesn't have to be slash home. It can be whatever you want. And then the component I want to execute will be the home component. And then I'm just going to duplicate that. And this one's going to become about. And the component will become about. And that is it for my router file. Now, as you guys create components for your data, you will obviously need to add the routes. Once you're done that, we can work in navigation.jsx and add our links. And then we can plug the whole thing into the browser, and then you are ready to go for your project. So I'll keep this open, but I'll split my screen. And I'll collapse this sidebar here. And I'll open up navigation JSX on this side. So again, I'm going to IMR and SFC, and I'm going to call it navigation. And for the navigation, all I'm going to do is create a nav element and a UL with some LI tags. That's it. I'm not going to add any bootstrap or anything else in. You guys can create all that stuff on your own. I'm going to add not a href, right? What do I need here? I need a link, right? That's not very helpful. There we go. So remember, this path has to match the route path, right? So I wanted link to home. It has to match the same path that's in my route. And there we go. We have our links. So I will copy that. And I'm just going to move the navigation link over here now. And then in app.jsx, we're now ready to import our router from components, shared router, and our navigation. And then we can add them as our actual components. Make sure you put the navigation first, otherwise it will appear underneath the components as they render, which you don't want. Like so. So in just slightly less than 15 minutes, we've built the fundamental parts of your application. Crazy fast, eh? All right, so let's just quickly walk through what we've done so far today. We have taken our index.jsx file and purged it of all things so that all that's left is just the app component that we're loading, and we're dumping whatever it happens to have into it into the root element inside our index.html file. The app.jsx file that we're loading in, this is where we're going to wrap our application in our browser router, and we're doing that because we want to be able to turn on and off components and load them easily. This is the stuff that basically controls all of that, right? The browser router helps us to control that. The navigation component for that, which we have here, just provides basically a menu. That's all it's doing. It's just giving us a menu to these things. However, there is some magic that happens with these link. They basically force soft request so we don't wind up with complete browser re-renders. The router is going to take a look at the paths that are being provided and then either hide or show the component that is relative, right? So if, for example, you're accessing the root of our application, then it will show the home component. If you're accessing the about, it will hide the home component and show the about component. The home and about components we created, they're just simply empty components right now. They don't have anything inside of them. Those are left over for you to publish however you want to do it. Now here's the things that I want you to think about, right? The whole point of React is to be as modular and dry as possible. So a common thing, and let's take a look at this because I can tell you right now, most people will do this. A common thing that a lot of people want to do when they create a page is to add in a header. I'm going to start up my application here. And our app should load. Yep, there we go. Home and about, right? I can jump back and forth. So a common thing you may want to do is add a header. So you'll do this kind of thing, right? So you'll add a header. And you might give it an H1, right? And call it home. See? Home. And then you're going to copy this code. Paste it over here and type in about. And then Sean's going to write you a note. And he's going to say, you want to avoid code duplication. Right? I don't want you to duplicate code. What should we do with this to avoid duplication? What could we do? What's a good approach? What's React? What kind of design pattern is React? We've mentioned it quite a few times at this point. Yes, absolutely, Alex. That's 100% what we should do. We should create a header component. And you know what? Why don't we do it together so that we're all comfortable and familiar with that? So in my shared folder here, I'm going to right-click and choose New File, and I'm going to create a header component, JSX. So I have this new component called header. I'm going to type in IMR and import my React. I'm going to type in SFC and call my component header. And like Alex suggested, I'm going to give it props. Because what I'll do is I will pull the title out of the props. Now in here, all I'm going to do is copy this code that I did over here, the header code, and I'm going to paste it in here, but I'm going to change home to props.title. If I want to be really creative, I could change props up here to be destructured, so that title is automatically destructured out of it. That would be even nicer looking. And then I'm going to save it. Now, in order to implement the header into the home element, I'm going to import header from, oh, maybe I don't need to go down that far. There we go, shared header. And I'm going to replace this code with header, and I'm going to provide it the property that I want to access, which is title. So title equals home. Notice nothing has changed. It looks exactly the same. So I've taken something that is just repetitious, right? Same in the about, I'm using that code there, and it was repetitious, and I've turned it into a component that I can just provide more details to make it better. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to import header from shared header and replace this code here with the header component, give it a title property, props.title. Whoops. Sorry, don't need quotes. Need props.title. That was weird. Oh, no, sorry. I'm doing that wrong. My apologies. Late. It's absolutely late. Wouldn't want to be in my PHP class tonight, that's for sure. About. There we go. So now I can flip back and forth. And they're just using the same component. So I will give you this code as well, the header JSX file. Because that's a good example of how to create a way to deal with redundant code. Where's home? And I'll give you home, the code that goes into home. So hopefully that will give you a good starting point. Obviously, you can always reach out to me on Slack if you get stuck. A few of you are still emailing me. Email is terrible. I never get to it in time. Somebody emailed me and I didn't get to it for almost a day and a half, and I think it was more important than that. Slack is the best way to contact me. Any questions about the project or any of this stuff? Because that's it. That's all I've got for you. I almost spit out my pop there. That's all I got for you, and the person disconnects instantly. I'm out of here. There goes another one. No questions? That's it? All right, have a good night, guys.